picture this. You're just sitting on your couch, right? You're watching this intense Hollywood thriller.
Oh, yeah. Best way to spend a Friday night.
Exactly. And the dialogue is super fast. The plot is, it's really complex. But you are following along without any subtitles.
Right.
You're getting every nuanced joke, every tense exchange. You just feel, entirely fluent.
You feel like a native speaker in that moment.
Yeah. But then, and this is where it all falls apart, a few hours later, you step out to grab a coffee.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Right. You walk up to the counter. The barista asks you just a completely standard question, and suddenly, nothing.
Just a blank wall.
Literally a blank wall. You open your mouth, but the words have they vanished. Your
Yeah.
chest gets tight. Your brain completely stops processing.
Yeah, your voice just feels physically locked.
Locked behind an invisible wall, and you just end up, pointing at a muffin and nodding like an idiot.
We have all been there. It is brutal.
It really is. So why does this happen? Why can our brains be so brilliant in the living room and then just utterly paralyzed in the real world?
It's a huge question.
It is. And welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, Lily. And before we unpack the incredible psychological and neurological mechanics behind the exact scenario, I actually have a quick favor to ask.
Rizu?
If you want to keep exploring these fascinating, life-changing concepts with us, please take a second right now to subscribe to the show. It's the absolute best way to support us and ensure you never miss a deep dive into the source material.
Highly recommend hitting that button.
Thank you. All right, let me introduce my brilliant co-host and our resident expert, Ryan. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. And hello to you listening.
So glad to have you.
I have been so eager to get into this particular deep dive because, honestly, that opening scenario you just described, it's arguably the single most frustrating experience a human being can have.
It really is this universal feeling of helplessness. The vocabulary's in your head somewhere.
Oh, you own the words. They're in there.
They are. But you just can't access them when the spotlight is turned on. So we are going to completely dismantle that wall today.
We are tearing it down.
We're exploring a highly effective 8-part framework we extracted from our sources. It's designed to physically and neurologically bridge that massive gap between passive understanding and active speaking.
Yeah, because the disparity between what you can passively absorb and what you can actively produce.
Yeah.
It's fascinating from a cognitive science perspective.
Right, because it's not a failure of intelligence, is it?
No, not at all. And it's not a lack of vocabulary either. The frustration really comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of how the brain stores and retrieves different types of information.
When we were prepping for this deep dive, this image just kept coming to my mind. Think about a passionate, die-hard American football fan.
Okay, yeah.
Like someone who watches games every single Sunday for 20 years. They know every single rule in the book.
They know the stats, the formations.
Everything. The defensive coverage schemes. They sit on their couch and scream at the TV because they can see exactly when a quarterback missed an open receiver.
Oh, they're the ultimate armchair quarterback.
Exactly. Their intellectual, analytical understanding of football is basically flawless. But, and here's the catch, if you took that exact same fan, strapped a helmet on them, and just threw them onto the field in the middle of a pro game.
Oh man, with a 250-pound linebacker charging straight at them.
Yeah, they wouldn't know what to do. They would immediately, instinctively freeze.
Right, because that captures the neurological reality perfectly.
It really does.
What we're looking at with that sports fan and, the language learner watching movies without subtitles is declarative memory.
Declarative memory, let's break that down.
So declarative knowledge is fact-based. It's the information stored primarily in your hippocampus. You know that a rule exists. You know that a word means a certain thing.
Because you can declare it.
Exactly. You can declare it on a test. But stepping onto the field or stepping up to the coffee counter, that requires something entirely different. It requires procedural memory.
Okay, so declarative is knowing what and procedural is knowing how.
Precisely. Procedural memory involves the basal ganglia and the motor cortex. It's that physical, unconscious muscle memory of how to execute an action under pressure.
Without having to consciously think about it.
Right. In real time. Reading a textbook or watching a movie builds incredible declarative memory, but it builds absolutely zero procedural memory.
Because you haven't conditioned your body to react, right? You haven't trained the physical musculature or the real-time neural pathways.
Yeah, and speaking a language is very much a physical act. I mean, you're coordinating your lungs, your vocal cords, your tongue, lips, jaw.
All in fractions of a second.
Exactly. It's an athletic feat, really. So the framework we're exploring today is essentially the training camp to build that procedural memory.
It's how we take you from being the armchair quarterback to being the actual athlete on the field.
Exactly. And the very first conceptual shift requires us to ruthlessly examine how we actually consume information. We have to confront this very comforting illusion.
Oh, the illusion of passive listening.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I am so guilty of this. I think we all are, really.
It's so common.
You just have an English broadcast playing in the background while you're driving to work. Or maybe the news is running while you're chopping vegetables for dinner.
And you feel great about it.
You do. You get this warm sense of accomplishment. You're thinking, I'm immersing myself, I'm studying, I'm doing the work.
Right, because it feels incredibly productive. You're getting that little dopamine hit of task completion.
Yeah, check that off the list.
And to be fair, you are exposing yourself to the baseline sounds of the language, which is a necessary first step. But it gives a dangerously false sense of conversational readiness.
Because my brain isn't actually doing the heavy lifting, is it? I'm just letting the noise sort of wash over me while I focus on traffic or onions.
Exactly. When you passively listen, your brain is doing the absolute minimum amount of cognitive work required to extract a general meaning.
It's just skimming.
It relies heavily on context clues. So if you hear a news anchor use a complicated word, but there's footage of a hurricane behind them, your brain pattern matches just enough to say, okay, bad weather, got it.
Right. It's not paying attention to the precise articulation of the vowels.
No.
Yeah.
It's not tracking the rhythm of the sentence or the stress on syllables or the physical movements the speaker's mouth is making. It's just skimming the audio.
Which means if I try to replicate that sentence later, my mouth has literally no idea what to do. Because my brain never bothered to download the physiological instructions.
It only downloaded the vague summary.
Wow. Okay, so to transition to active speaking, you must mandate active listening. And the source material highlights this powerful, actionable technique for this: shadowing.
Yes, shadowing is phenomenal.
I love the visual this word evokes. You aren't just an audience member anymore. You become the literal shadow of the speaker. You are mimicking their every move.
And the mechanics of shadowing are highly specific.
Yeah.
It is not just, casually talking over someone.
Right, it's deliberate.
It's an intense cognitive exercise.
Yeah.
You start by finding a short piece of audio, maybe a minute of a show, preferably featuring a speaker whose voice and pacing you actually admire.
Someone you want to sound like.
Exactly. You listen to a single short sentence, then you physically hit the pause button, and then you repeat that exact sentence out loud.
Listen, pause, repeat. And the goal here isn't just to get the vocabulary right, is it? You're trying to clone the delivery.
You're aiming for an exact phonetic replica. You want to match their pitch, their tone, the exact duration they held a vowel.
The exact moment their voice rose at the end of a question.
Yes, it's an auditory feedback loop.
And once you build up a bit of confidence with that listen, pause, repeat cycle, you can kind of level up the difficulty. Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Then you attempt to speak simultaneously with the recording.
So you're literally talking over the person.
Trying to ride the exact wave of their pacing and rhythm in real time without pausing.
That simultaneous shadowing must force your brain's auditory processing centers and your motor cortex to communicate instantly.
It completely links them up.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second on behalf of anyone listening who has a busy schedule.
Sure, go for it.
This sounds utterly exhausting.
Oh, it is.
Right. Like, if I have to pause and repeat every single sentence of a 30-minute show, it's going to take me 3 hours to get through it. My throat will be sore, my brain will be fried, and I'll probably just start to hate the language.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
So is this the new normal? Is this how we have to consume all media from now on?
It's a very practical concern, and the answer is an emphatic no. If you attempted to consume all your media this way, you'd experience massive cognitive burnout within a few days.
Okay. Yeah.
Shadowing is not how you enjoy a movie or stay informed about the news. Shadowing is a targeted, isolated drill.
Oh, I see. So it's like going to the gym. You don't walk around carrying dumbbells all day long.
Right, you'd look ridiculous.
You go to the gym for 20 minutes to lift heavy things, and then you put them down and live your normal life.
A perfect parallel from the source is a musician practicing scales. Like, a concert pianist does not sit down on stage at Carnegie Hall and play scales for the audience.
They play a beautiful, flowing sonata.
But they achieve that beautiful sonata because they spent 15 minutes every single morning in a practice room, running scales up and down the keyboard,
To train those micro muscles in their fingers.
and solidify the neural pathways. So shadowing is your scale practice. 10 minutes a day is more than enough to yield incredible results.
Okay, that makes it feel infinitely more manageable. It's an isolated drill. And what this drill accomplishes is pretty fascinating. We aren't just learning words, we're capturing the music of the language.
Because language is not just data. It isn't merely a spreadsheet of vocabulary words arranged in some grammatical sequence. Every single language on Earth has its own unique prosody.
Let's define prosody for a moment, just so we're all on the same page.
Yeah, prosody is the melody of speech. It's the rhythm, the stress patterns, the intonation. It's why French sounds romantic and flowing to many, while German might sound more staccato and rhythmic.
Right, and English has its own weird rhythm.
Oh, English uses stress timing.
Yeah.
We emphasize certain syllables and squish other words together. We don't say, what are you doing?
Yeah, what you doing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The words compress and blend. And if you learned English from a textbook, you expect to hear those separated, distinct words.
But native speakers speak in musical phrases.
Yeah. So when you shadow, you are forcing your vocal tract to physically move in these new, unfamiliar musical patterns. You're training your lips, jaw, and tongue to navigate physical transitions between sounds that literally don't exist in your native language.
You are carving new neural pathways in your motor cortex. You're no longer observing the music, you're playing the instrument.
Beautifully put.
Okay, so shadowing trains the physical machinery, it gets the mouth ready. But that naturally introduces the next massive hurdle.
The internal block.
Right. Mimicry is incredibly valuable, but at the end of the day, being a parrot isn't fluency. Eventually, you have to generate your own original thoughts. You have to speak spontaneously.
And to do that, you have to fundamentally reprogram the psychological environment where your thoughts are born.
Which means moving from the physical mechanics of speaking to the internal architecture of thinking.
Exactly.
And our source outlines this next tip. Creating a dedicated English mode in your daily life. The concept here is to carve out a highly specific, protected window of time, maybe just 5 to 10 minutes a day, where you completely shut off your native language.
You lock it away.
During this window, you must force your internal monologue, that voice inside your head, to operate exclusively in English.
Which is incredibly difficult because we take our internal monologue for granted. It runs constantly narrating our fears, our plans, our observations.
And it runs automatically in our mother tongue. So how do we actually hijack that system? Because just sitting on the couch, silently commanding my brain, like, think in English, that usually just results in a blank stare.
Yeah, that doesn't work. The tactic for executing this is beautifully simple, yet almost theatrical. You have to start talking to yourself.
Out loud.
Out loud. You become the narrator of your own mundane life. Externalizing the internal monologue is the key here.
Okay, give us an example.
So, you're alone in your apartment, you're getting ready for work, and you literally start broadcasting your stream of consciousness to the empty room. Okay, I need to make breakfast. I'm walking to the fridge is cold. I'm taking out 2 eggs. I need a pan. Where did I put the pan?
It sounds slightly unhinged when you describe it like that. I can just imagine someone's roommate walking in and wondering what on earth is happening.
And it might feel a bit eccentric, sure.
Yeah.
But the cognitive science behind why this is so effective is profound. It comes down to understanding cognitive load and the natural biological laziness of the human brain.
Wait, tell me more about that. Our brains are lazy.
Oh, absolutely. Our brains are the most energy-hungry organs in our bodies. They consume about 20% of our daily caloric intake.
Wow, 20% just to think.
Yeah. So because of this, evolution has designed the brain to be an incredibly efficient, energy-saving machine. Your brain constantly seeks the path of least resistance to conserve calories.
And for you, the path of absolute least resistance for generating a thought is your native language.
Right. It requires zero conscious effort. It's entirely automated.
That makes total sense. It's the default operating system.
Exactly. So let's look at what happens when you don't practice narrating your life and you suddenly find yourself standing in front of a native English speaker at, say, a networking event.
High stress.
Your brain is confronted with a massive, high-energy computational task. First, it generates the original thought in your native language. Then, it has to route that thought to a translation center. Then it has to frantically search your memory archives for the correct English vocabulary. Then it has to hold those words in its working memory while it applies the appropriate grammatical rules.
It's doing all of this on the fly.
And finally, it sends the motor commands to your mouth, to articulate the sentence.
Just hearing you list those steps sounds exhausting.
It is a huge cognitive load. And all of those computational steps take time. That time delay, those 3 or 4 seconds where your brain is frantically translating and assembling, that is exactly what you experience in the real world as freezing.
So the freeze is just system lag. It's like when a computer gets the spinning hourglass icon because the processor is overloaded.
That is the perfect analogy. The CPU is maxed out. So by creating an English mode and narrating your mundane actions out loud every morning, you are forcibly dragging your brain out of its comfortable, energy-saving default state.
You're demanding that it skip the translation phase entirely.
Exactly. You are forcing the language generation centers to originate the thought natively in English.
You are bypassing the middleman.
Precisely. It is basically a high-intensity interval training workout for your neural pathways.
Yeah.
You're forcing the brain to get comfortable doing the heavy lifting without the crutch of translation.
And what I find so brilliant about the narrating yourself making breakfast tactic is the psychological safety of it. You know, talking to yourself in the kitchen might feel silly, but it is a completely zero-stakes environment.
It's a rehearsal space.
Yeah.
There is no audience. There's no one to judge your verb conjugations.
Exactly. And more importantly, it forces you to map out your own ignorance in a safe environment.
Yes, this is crucial.
It forces you to discover exactly what vocabulary you don't possess before you're actually required to use it in public. Let's imagine that kitchen scenario again. You're narrating, I'm making eggs, I'm turning on the stove, I need to flip the egg with the flow.
And you just stop.
Right.
Yeah.
Your narration grinds to a halt because you realize you have absolutely no idea how to say spatula in English.
You hit a wall. The vocabulary gap is completely exposed.
But you hit that wall in the absolute safety of your own home. You can pull out your phone, look up the word, say spatula out loud a few times, and seamlessly continue your narration.
You've just acquired a highly relevant, deeply contextual piece of vocabulary.
You identified a gap proactively rather than discovering that gap reactively while trying to, say, ask a store clerk where the kitchen supplies are, while a line of impatient people taps their feet behind you.
The context is what makes it stick.
Yeah.
When you learn a word because you had a genuine, immediate physical need to use it in your environment, your brain flags that information as highly valuable.
It files it away as important.
It moves it into long-term storage much faster than if you had just read the word on some random flashcard.
Which brings us to a major pivot point in our framework. When you're doing your morning narration and you inevitably have to search for a word or build a sentence, the methodology you use to store that new information changes everything.
It really does.
And according to our source material, it turns out the way the vast majority of us were taught to memorize vocabulary in school is fundamentally flawed.
It is a systemic failure of traditional language education.
The imperative here is radical. You must completely abandon the practice of learning single words.
We'll throw it out.
We all know this drill, right? We all lived in high school or middle school. You are handed a stack of flashcards. One side has a single noun or verb, cat, run, house, book.
The other side has the translation in your native language.
You memorize the list, you pass the Friday quiz, and you mistakenly believe you are acquiring the language.
And then you travel abroad, you encounter a real human being, and you realize that knowing the isolated definition of the word house does absolutely nothing to help you explain to a plumber that the pipes under your sink are leaking.
Right. The single words are useless without the glue to hold them together. So if we are throwing away our single word flashcards, what's the superior alternative?
We need to start learning in chunks.
Chunks. Okay, chunking is the secret architecture behind true fluency, isn't it?
Oh, entirely. If you want to know how native speakers process language so quickly, it is entirely based on chunks.
So let's define exactly what a chunk is for you listening. A chunk is a group of words that naturally and frequently appear together. It can be a common phrase, an idiom, a collocation, or a sentence starter.
For example, instead of memorizing the isolated definition of the word point, which has dozens of meanings, right? From pointing a finger to a decimal point, you memorize the entire phrase as one single unit. That's a good point.
Right. Or instead of learning the word mean and trying to understand how it functions as a verb, an adjective, or a mathematical average, you just learn the conversational chunk. You know what I mean?
Let me see. By the way, as far as I know, these are all chunks.
I want to really dig into the cognitive science here because when we were discussing this earlier, your explanation of working memory completely blew my mind. Why does learning chunks save us so much mental processing power compared to assembling single words?
It loops right back to the concept of the brain as a computer processor, and specifically, the limitations of our working memory.
Our mental RAM.
Exactly. Working memory is the part of your brain that holds and manipulates information in real time. And human working memory is notoriously limited. We can only hold a few items in our conscious awareness at any given moment.
So how does the traditional single word method interact with that limited RAM?
Terribly. If you only possess a mental dictionary of single, isolated words, then every single time you want to express a thought, your brain has to perform an incredibly complex multi-step engineering task from scratch.
Every single time?
Every time. You have to locate the correct noun, then you have to locate the correct verb, then your working memory has to retrieve the abstract rules of grammar.
Okay, what tense is this? Is it past continuous? If so, I need to add an auxiliary verb.
I need to conjugate the main verb.
Right.
Now I need a preposition. Does depend go with on or of?
It's a frantic, real-time assembly line.
It is. You're frantically trying to build the grammatical architecture of the sentence while the other person is staring at you, waiting for a reply.
Which is terrifying.
It is incredibly taxing. If all of your limited working memory is consumed by the friction of applying grammar rules to single words, there is zero processing power left to actually focus on the deeper idea you're trying to communicate.
That is when the system crashes. That is when you freeze.
The RAM is full.
So how do chunks bypass this computational bottleneck?
Chunks operate as pre-assembled, fully functional tools. When you learn the phrase, "that's a good point," as a single indivisible unit, your brain doesn't have to parse the grammar.
It doesn't analyze it and say, that is a demonstrative pronoun.
The A is the indefinite article, and good is the adjective modifying the noun point. No. Your brain just sees it as one big word.
Oh, that's wild. It just sees it as one big word.
Yes. The brain retrieves the entire phrase as a single item from memory. You completely bypass the grammar building phase. You don't need to know the rules of how the phrase was constructed because it is already built and ready for deployment.
The analogy that works best for me here is a construction site. Imagine you're trying to build a house and a sudden rainstorm hits. You need shelter immediately.
Right.
If you learned language via single words, you're out there in the pouring rain, frantically trying to mix mortar, lay down a single brick, check if it's perfectly level, and then place the next brick. You're going to get soaked, and it's going to take weeks.
It's slow, deliberate, and highly vulnerable to the elements.
Exactly. But learning chunks is like having an entire prefabricated wall dropped onto the foundation by a crane. Boom. It is instantly in place. The bricks are already perfectly aligned. The mortar is already dry. It provides immediate structure and shelter.
That's the perfect way to visualize it.
Learning chunks is the ultimate shortcut because you are borrowing the pre-perfected grammar of native speakers.
You don't have to invent the structure, you just have to use it. And there is a secondary, highly tactical benefit to chunks that is crucial for maintaining the flow of a conversation.
What's that?
Chunks buy you time.
Oh, they act like a conversational buffer.
Exactly. Let's say you're in a deep discussion at work and your colleague asks you a really complex question. If you have a repertoire of chunks ready, you can deploy one instantly. You can say, "That is a really interesting perspective, but let me see if I understand you correctly."
That entire sentence just rolled off the tongue automatically.
And while your mouth is articulating that pre-assembled chunk on autopilot, your brain is not involved in speaking. Your brain just gained 3 precious seconds of completely free processing power to figure out what your actual substantive response is going to be.
You created a smoke screen of fluency while your brain loaded the next thought. That is brilliant.
It smooths out the entire interaction. It eliminates the awkward silences that make learners feel insecure.
So, a practical challenge for you listening. Look at your study materials today. If you're keeping a vocabulary notebook filled with isolated nouns and verbs, throw that method out.
Burn it. Start collecting phrases. When you watch a movie, don't write down the one word you didn't know. Write down the entire sentence it lived in. Memorize the whole block.
So we are building a truly formidable toolkit here. We have shadowing to physically train the vocal apparatus. We have the English mode narration to bypass the translation lag in our minds. We are utilizing chunks to circumvent the limits of working memory.
It's a solid foundation.
It is. But this leads us to the critical concept of maintenance, because having the best tools in the world is useless if you don't create the right biological environment for them to become permanent.
which requires a brutal yet absolutely necessary commitment to consistency. We have to look at how we schedule our learning.
Right. And our source drops a pretty stark mathematical truth regarding language acquisition that I think fundamentally challenges how busy adults try to learn.
The truth is that 5 to 10 minutes of speaking practice every single day will yield exponentially better results than a heroic 3-hour marathon study session on a Saturday afternoon.
This is the weekend warrior syndrome. You have a demanding job, family obligations, and life just gets in the way from Monday to Friday.
It happens to everyone.
You feel guilty about ignoring your language practice, so you try to compensate by locking yourself in a room for 3 hours on Saturday to cram motor. Why doesn't that brute force method work for speaking?
Because it fundamentally misunderstands the biology of neuroplasticity. We have established that speaking is a physical and neurological skill, much like playing a sport or an instrument.
Right.
You cannot build complex motor memory through binging.
You can't go to the gym once a month for 8 hours and expect to get in shape. You'll just tear a muscle.
Exactly. Let's look at the cellular level. When you practice speaking English, your neurons fire in specific patterns. With repeated daily firing, your brain begins to coat those specific neural pathways in a substance called myelin.
Myelin, okay.
Myelination is basically the biological mechanism of fluency. It acts like insulation on a copper wire, making the electrical signals travel faster and more efficiently.
So daily practice is literally physically thickening the wires in your brain.
Yes. But here is the catch. Myelination requires consistent, repeated signaling over time. It responds to frequency, not duration.
Frequency, not duration.
Okay. If you only practice once a week, even if it's for 3 hours, the brain doesn't receive a consistent signal that these pathways are vital for your daily survival. So in the 6 days between your practice sessions, the brain begins to prune those connections. The myelin degrades.
Oh, wow. It's a literal use it or lose it economy.
Every Saturday, you're spending the first hour of your study session just trying to rebuild the neurological infrastructure that degraded during the week.
That is so frustrating.
But if you practice for just 5 minutes every single day, you are constantly sending a priority signal to your brain. This network is active. Keep the myelin thick.
Consistency forces the brain to treat the language as a permanent required operating system rather than just some temporary hobby.
Exactly.
So we commit to the 5 or 10 minutes a day, but how do we spend those 5 minutes to get the maximum return on investment? That brings us to what might be the most intimidating, uncomfortable tool in this entire framework.
Oh yeah, it is the tool that generates the highest amount of resistance and procrastination.
The voice recorder app on your smartphone?
The dreaded objective mirror.
The methodology here is straightforward, but for many, it sounds like absolute torture. You give yourself a simple, open-ended prompt: what was the most challenging part of my day? Or, what did I think of the last episode of that show?
You hit record on your phone, you speak your unscripted answer out loud for 1 or 2 minutes, and then here's the brutal part. You force yourself to listen back to the recording.
I can practically hear the collective groan from the listeners right now.
Oh, I have deep empathy for anyone dreading this. There is a universal, visceral horror in hearing your own voice played back to you.
Even in your native language, it's unpleasant. Your voice always sounds higher or thinner or just somehow wrong.
There is actually a physiological reason for that discomfort. When you speak normally, you hear your own voice through a combination of air conduction, the sound traveling through the air to your ears, and bone conduction.
Bone conduction.
Yeah, the sound vibrating through the bones of your skull. The bone conduction lowers the frequency, making your voice sound deeper and richer to you.
So we hear an idealized radio DJ version of ourselves in our own heads.
Exactly. But a recording only captures the air conduction. It strips away the bass from the bone conduction. So when you hear a recording, it literally sounds like a stranger's voice. Your brain experiences cognitive dissonance.
That explains so much. But for language learners, there is a massive added layer of psychological terror. The fear of hearing your own bad accent, all the insecurities just bubble right up.
The cringe factor is intense. But we have to fundamentally reframe this immediately. The paralyzing shame over accents is a massive barrier to fluency. I want everyone listening to internalize this concept from our source. Your accent is not bad. Your accent is simply the history of your vocal tract.
Your accent is the history of your vocal tract. I absolutely love that. It entirely removes the moral judgment from pronunciation.
An accent is the phonetic legacy of your mother tongue. It proves you already master a complex linguistic system. It is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of identity.
Right.
Unless your pronunciation is so obscured that a native speaker literally cannot comprehend the words, your accent is fine. The goal of this framework is crystal clear communication, not impersonating a news anchor from London or New York.
Exactly. But aside from functioning as exposure therapy to help us get over the psychological hurdle of hearing ourselves, why is the recording process so functionally critical to improvement? Why must we subject ourselves to this uncomfortable mirror?
Because it provides the only path to objective self-correction. When you are engaged in spontaneous speaking, your brain is entirely consumed by the complex high-energy task of generation.
Like we talked about earlier.
Right. You're accessing vocabulary, managing syntax, monitoring the other person's facial expressions. Because your cognitive load is maxed out, your brain physically cannot monitor your own output effectively.
That rings so true. I'll be speaking, I'll feel great about it, and only 10 minutes later, walking to my car, will my brain suddenly realize, oh no, I used the past tense instead of the future tense back there.
You don't hear your own mistakes in real time. But when you record yourself and hit play, a profound shift occurs. You are no longer the speaker. You are the audience.
Your brain is freed up.
Entirely freed from the cognitive burden of generation. It can now dedicate 100% of its processing power to critical analysis. You become your own teacher.
You can listen to the audio with a cold, analytical ear. You can say, I notice I always stumble over the pronunciation of specifically, I need to drill that word. Or, wait, why did I say he don't instead of he doesn't? I know that rule, I just missed it in the moment.
And crucially, this tool is not just for hunting mistakes. It allows you to identify and reinforce your victories. You can listen back and realize, hey, that chunk I used right there, as far as I'm concerned, that sounded incredibly smooth and natural.
You can actually celebrate the wins.
And the best part is that you are conducting this entire feedback loop in total privacy. There is no impatient native speaker tapping their foot waiting for you. There's no classroom of peers judging you.
It is a completely sterile, stress-free environment for refinement.
Exactly. So to recap our isolated training protocol so far, we are shadowing to build physical muscle memory. We are doing daily English mode narration to bypass translation. We are loading up on chunks to reduce working memory load. We're doing it every single day to build myelin. And we are recording ourselves to course correct.
That is a bulletproof solo training program.
It really is.
But it is still solo training. And as we transition into the next phase of our deep dive, we have to acknowledge a harsh reality. Practicing in the quiet sanctuary of your bedroom is fantastic, but the real world is chaotic, unpredictable, and really intimidating.
It's messy out there.
How do we prepare the brain so it doesn't revert to freezing the moment the spotlight of reality hits? How do we take the training wheels off without crashing?
We have to introduce simulated chaos. We have to artificially inoculate the brain against the pressure of human interaction.
Which introduces one of my favorite tactics in this entire discussion, solo role-playing.
Such a great exercise.
This requires a bit of imagination, but the payoff is massive. The strategy is to mentally construct high-stress, unpredictable, or just highly common real-world scenarios.
Like walking up to the immigration officer at border control.
Yeah.
Or sitting down across from a panel for a high-stakes job interview.
Defending a project proposal to a skeptical boss. Or even just calling a busy restaurant to order takeout.
But the catch is, you play both sides of the conversation out loud. You are the nervous traveler, and you are the stern immigration officer. You are the confident job applicant and the skeptical interviewer.
You play both roles, pacing around your living room, forcing yourself to react to unexpected questions.
Exactly.
I want to really unpack the psychology of why this is necessary. We talked earlier about cognitive load and the CPU getting overwhelmed, but there is a massive emotional and biological component to freezing in real life, isn't there? Why does a conversation feel like a threat?
It is a pure, ancient, evolutionary stress response. The brain freezes during a real-life language encounter because the situation is novel, unpredictable, and carries high social stakes.
Social stakes.
Deep inside your brain is the amygdala, the primitive alarm system responsible for the fight, flight, or freeze response.
The fear center.
Exactly. To your amygdala, speaking a foreign language imperfectly to a native speaker is perceived as a genuine threat to your social standing. Your brain subconsciously calculates. If I say the wrong thing, I will look foolish, I will be judged, I might be ostracized from the tribe.
And evolutionarily speaking, being kicked out of the tribe meant death.
Yes. So when the amygdala detects this social threat, it sounds the alarm. It floods your brain with cortisol and adrenaline. And here's the mechanical problem. When the amygdala fires up, it literally inhibits and hijacks the prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is where all our complex thinking happens.
It's the seat of logic, executive function, and crucially, complex language processing. So when you're stressed, your access to advanced vocabulary and grammar is physically blocked by the stress hormones.
Oh my gosh.
Your brain is prioritizing immediate physical survival over the correct conjugation of a past participle.
Wow. So freezing isn't a lack of intelligence or poor study habits. It is literally a biological defense mechanism. Your brain is deciding that silence is safer than making a mistake.
Precisely. It's safer to say nothing than to say the wrong thing.
So how does pacing around my living room pretending to order a pizza counter millions of years of evolutionary biology?
Through the psychological principle of exposure therapy and simulation. By vividly role-playing these scenarios, by artificially generating a little bit of that stress while playing both roles, you are familiarizing your nervous system with the context.
You are building a mental sandbox.
You're building neurological pathways for that specific stressful situation. When you have pretended to argue with a cashier in English 20 times in your kitchen, and you finally have to resolve a billing issue at a store in real life, your brain recognizes the pattern.
It says, I know this.
Exactly. It scans the environment and says, wait, we have run this simulation before. We survived it. This is not novel. This is not a life or death threat.
The amygdala stays quiet.
The alarm doesn't sound. The prefrontal cortex stays online, and you retain access to all those chunks and vocabulary words you practiced. Role-playing is a flight simulator for your brain.
Pilots crash in the simulator hundreds of times so they don't panic when an engine fails in the air.
That is an incredible analogy.
That is incredibly empowering. But this deep dive into the psychology of stress leads us directly to the emotional core of this entire discussion. If the amygdala is reacting to the fear of making a mistake, we have to face that fear head on. We have to confront the biggest monster in the room.
The paralyzing, suffocating, identity-crushing fear of making errors.
The fear of using bad grammar, the terror of using the wrong vocabulary word and sounding uneducated, the fear of being laughed at. This anxiety is the primary reason the invisible wall exists. It is why people study for 10 years and never open their mouths.
It is the ultimate barrier. And dismantling it requires a radical, absolute paradigm shift in how we view the process of learning. And unfortunately, we've all been deeply traumatized by how the education system handles mistakes.
It's the trauma of the red pen.
Exactly. For a century, schools have taught language using the grammar translation method. They treat language like a math equation or a physics problem.
Right. There is an objective right answer, then there is an objective wrong answer.
And if you get it wrong, you are penalized. Your essay comes back bleeding with red ink. You get a bad grade. You are conditioned to view mistakes as a measure of your failure and a reflection of your intelligence.
And we carry that academic trauma directly into our adult lives. We view a casual conversation at a bus stop as an oral exam. We think the native speaker is mentally wielding a red pen, grading our performance.
And that mindset is fatal to fluency. Because in the real world, language is not an academic subject to be graded. Language is a messy, imprecise tool for human connection. The paradigm shift that every learner must embrace is this. Mistakes are not a sign of failure. Mistakes are undeniable, physical proof of your bravery.
Undeniable proof of bravery. I want everyone listening to let that sink in. You only make a mistake when you are courageous enough to step onto the field.
You have to accept the biological reality of skill acquisition. Fluency does not precede mistakes. You don't study quietly in a corner until you're perfectly fluent and then emerge to speak flawlessly. Fluency is the result of making thousands and tens of thousands of mistakes.
It's a process of calibration.
Yes, like tuning a guitar.
Yeah.
Every time you make an error, notice it and correct it. You are turning the tuning peg. You are calibrating your language engine. You cannot skip the mistake phase.
It's mandatory.
It is a mandatory neurological requirement for fluency. If your spoken output is 100% flawless, you are staying far too safely within your comfort zone, and your growth is stagnated.
The source framework provides an ultimate golden rule to live by here. A mantra to repeat when the anxiety hits. I want to emphatically share this with you listening. Communication over perfection.
Communication over perfection. That must become your guiding philosophy.
Let's ground this in reality. Imagine you are on a trip to Paris. You walk into a bakery. You are hungry. You point at a beautiful pastry behind the glass and you say, "I want to eat that bread."
From an academic standpoint, the grammar is atrocious. You miss the infinitive, the vocabulary is imprecise, the red pen would destroy you.
Did the baker hand you the croissant? Did you pay for it? Are you currently eating a delicious pastry? Yes. You successfully transferred an idea from your brain into the baker's brain and you achieved your goal.
In the real world, if the person across from you understood your intention, you won. The grammatical structure simply does not matter in the moment of transaction.
The core purpose of language is the transfer of intent. The grammar, the syntax, the perfect prepositions, those are just the wrapping paper around the idea. If the package gets delivered and the recipient opens it, the mission is an absolute success.
We have to stop letting the fear of imperfect wrapping paper prevent us from ever sending the package. Make friends with your mistakes. They're the stepping stones building the bridge.
Make friends with your mistakes. So, let's check our progress. You are brave. You embrace the messy reality of communication. You are armed with your prefabricated chunks to bypass system lag. You have role-played the stressful scenarios so your amygdala remains calm.
The mental blocks are effectively removed.
But there is one final mechanical challenge to overcome to achieve true conversational rhythm.
The final frontier? The speed of response.
Because you can be brave and you can know your chunks, but real life doesn't happen at your preferred comfortable pace. Real conversation moves at lightning speed.
It does. Which brings us to the necessity of practicing response speed. We have to remember that listening, even the act of shadowing we discussed earlier, is essentially a one-way street. You are receiving.
Right.
But a true conversation is a high-speed ping-pong match. It is a rapid, continuous cycle of listen, process, speak, listen, process, speak.
And the friction point for learners is the net in the middle of that ping pong table. It is the transition between decoding the incoming audio and encoding the outgoing thought. It's the reaction gap.
That reaction gap is the exact source of those agonizing 3-second silences that make learners feel so awkward. The native speaker asks a question, and then there is dead air while the learner's brain frantically revs up the engine, switches gears, and formulates a reply.
So how do we train that specific reflex? We can't shadow a conversation because we don't know what the other person's going to say. How do we close the reaction gap?
Technology has actually provided us with a miraculous tool for this specific problem. We are living in an era where you have access to sophisticated AI chatbots right on your phone.
Yes.
You can engage in real-time spoken conversations with an AI that never judges you, never loses patience, and speaks in perfect English.
Using voice-to-voice AI is a game changer, but we aren't just having casual chats. There is a specific methodology here to train speed.
You must use the AI as a sparring partner. You give the AI explicit instructions. You tell it, "I want to practice my conversational reaction time. Ask me a series of rapid-fire random questions. Give me only 2 seconds to reply before you ask the next one."
Where did you grow up? What is your favorite book? Why do you like coffee more than tea? If you could travel anywhere, where would you go?
The critical shift here is abandoning perfection. The goal of this speed drill is not to craft a beautiful, poetic, grammatically flawless sentence. The goal is sheer velocity. How fast can you formulate any coherent reply that keeps the rally going?
You are training the reflex, not the vocabulary. It's exactly like a boxer hitting the speed bag. When a boxer hits the speed bag, they aren't practicing their footwork or their defensive strategy or their knockout punch.
No, they are solely training their hands and eyes to react to a chaotic rhythm as fast as humanly possible.
Exactly. You are forcing the brain to grab whatever chunk is closest at hand and throw it out there. If the AI asks, "Why do you like coffee?" and your brain panics, you just deploy a chunk. That's a good question. I guess I just like the taste. Boom, you hit the ball back.
And if you prefer human interaction over AI, this works perfectly with a language exchange buddy or a tutor. But you have to communicate your goals. You have to tell them, "Today is a speed drill. Don't correct my grammar. Just ask me questions and force me to answer instantly."
It forces you to rely on the chunks. It forces you to trust your instincts rather than overanalyzing your output. It bridges that final gap between knowing the language and actually speaking it on the fly.
That is the final piece of the puzzle.
This synthesizes everything. I want to take a moment to zoom out and look at the massive holistic architecture of the framework we have just constructed. Let's trace the complete path from the silent spectator on the couch to the confident athlete on the field.
We began by acknowledging a deeply empowering truth. The English is already inside your head. You have spent years building declarative knowledge through passive listening. The foundation is there. We just needed to build the procedural bridge.
We started the physical construction with shadowing, moving from passive absorption to active mimicry, training the vocal cords, the tongue, and the jaw to synchronize to the unique musical prosody of English. We woke up the physical machinery.
Then we addressed the internal operating system. We instituted the English mode, narrating our lives aloud to drag the brain out of its lazy reliance on the native language. We forced it to originate thoughts directly in English, eliminating the lag time of translation.
We performed a massive upgrade on our working memory by abandoning single-word flashcards and embracing chunks. We stopped frantically building brick walls in the rain and started dropping prefabricated walls into place, buying ourselves conversational processing time.
We cemented those new neural pathways through daily consistency. We recognized that 5 minutes a day builds thick myelin sheaths, while a weekend cram session lets them wither. We embraced the uncomfortable objective mirror of the voice recorder, stripping away the cringe of our own accents to become our own best teachers.
We inoculated ourselves against the fight-or-flight response. We used solo role-playing to simulate chaotic real-world encounters, proving to our amygdala that speaking is not a threat to our survival, keeping our prefrontal cortex online.
We radically redefined our relationship with mistakes, casting off the trauma of the academic red pen. We adopted communication over perfection as our absolute law, understanding that mistakes are the necessary calibrations of bravery.
And finally, we trained the reflex. We hit the conversational speed bag with AI or partners, prioritizing the sheer velocity of response over grammatical perfection, ensuring we can keep the ping-pong rally alive in the real world.
These are not just isolated study hacks. They are a comprehensive, interlocking neurological system. They form a literal bridge from the declarative memory of the hippocampus to the procedural execution of the motor cortex.
What is most inspiring to me about this entire approach is how it entirely shifts the locus of control. It shifts the power back to you, the listener. It pulls you out of the passive waiting room. You are no longer waiting for fluency to magically descend upon you after watching enough movies. You are the architect, actively building the bridge yourself, chunk by chunk, mistake by mistake.
It demands effort, certainly, but it is highly directed, biologically optimized effort.
Which brings us to our request for you. We always want these deep dives into the source material to be catalysts for action, not just interesting theories you listen to and forget. We want you to take this framework out of the conceptual realm and put it into the physical world today.
To you listening right now, which of these tools are you going to deploy today? Do not attempt to implement all of them at once. That will only trigger overwhelm and paralysis. Pick just one.
Will you spend 5 minutes shadowing a podcast on your commute home? Will you talk to your dog while making dinner to practice your English mode narration? Will you bravely hit record on your phone and endure the awkwardness for 60 seconds? Choose one action and execute it before you go to sleep tonight.
The bridge gets built one day at a time.
And as you embark on that daily practice, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought, something to deeply consider on your own after this deep dive concludes. We have spent an hour intensely focused on the mechanics, the neurology, and the strategies of language. But we must never forget the ultimate why. If the true purpose of language is simply human connection, if communication over perfection is the reality of the human experience, we have to ask ourselves a profound question.
It is the question that should drive all of this effort.
How much of your true, authentic personality, your unique humor, your brilliant insights, your specific perspective on the world are you keeping hidden away in silence simply because you are waiting for your grammar to be flawless? Your voice is the only key you have to share who you are with the world. Do not let the illusion of perfection keep you locked inside your own head.
The world desperately wants to hear what you have to say. It does not care how perfectly you conjugate the verbs. Speak. Even as your voice shakes, even if it's messy.
What a beautiful, vital place to conclude. Thank you so much for bringing your immense expertise to this framework today. This has been a truly illuminating conversation.
It has been my absolute pleasure. Thank you for exploring it with me. And to everyone listening, be brave out there. Keep building your bridge.
From both of us here at The Deep Dive, thank you so much for sharing your time and your mind with us. Embrace the messiness, make friends with your mistakes, and we will catch you on the next one. Take care.